Welcome to Last Minute Lecture. This free chapter overview is designed to help students review and understand key concepts. These summaries supplement, not replace, the original textbook and may not be redistributed or resold. For complete coverage, always consult the official text.
How do you take a standard 12-volt car battery, the boring heavy plastic box under the hood of your car, and use it to generate a 10,000-volt lightning bolt to start the engine?
Right, without just buying a bigger battery.
Exactly. You don't use a bigger battery, and you definitely don't break the laws of physics. Instead, you harness a phenomenon that engineers spend years learning to tame. You use the wild, untamed dynamics of a second-order circuit.
It really is one of the most brilliant mechanical workarounds in modern engineering, taking a small, steady push of energy and basically twisting it into a massive, violent spark.
Just by manipulating how that energy is stored.
Yeah, stored and released.
And that transformation is exactly what we're getting into today. Welcome to this deep dive. Whether you're a college student cramming for a big circuit analysis exam or, you're just encountering this stuff for the first time, we've got you covered.
Absolutely. We're going to make the math and the physics actually click.
Right, because if you've spent any time studying basic circuits, you know the standard plumbing analogies usually work fine. You flip a switch, current flows like water, it's clean, it's highly predictable.
Yeah, first-order circuits are pretty polite.
They are, but today we're pulling from our notes on Chapter 8 of Fundamentals of Electric Circuits, 5th edition. The chapter is called Second-Order Circuits, and we're going to look at what happens when that neat little plumbing analogy basically bursts a pipe.
We're stepping out of the static world and into a dynamic reality.
Where energy doesn't just flow, right, it sloshes, it pushes back, and it rings.
Which is where circuit design goes from a basic math exercise to an actual physical balancing act.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, in earlier chapters, you usually deal with first-order circuits.
Right, which only have one energy storage element, like just one capacitor.
Exactly. So if there's only one component storing energy, it just drains out, like a bucket with a hole in it. The energy just dissipates into the resistors.
But moving to Chapter 8, moving to second-order circuits, we introduce a second energy storage element.
Right. Typically, you have an inductor, which we denote as L, and a capacitor, denoted as C.
So having an inductor and a capacitor in the same circuit, is that what causes the energy to slosh back and forth, like tossing a ball between two people?
That is the perfect analogy. It captures the whole dynamic, because instead of one person just draining the energy, you have two components passing it back and forth.
Because they store energy in fundamentally different ways.
Yes. A capacitor stores energy in an electric field, which is based on voltage, but an inductor stores energy in a magnetic field based on current. So they're completely at odds with each other.
Oh, interesting. So they're fighting.
Pretty much. When you wire them together, the capacitor tries to dump its electrical energy, which forces current through the inductor.
And then the inductor takes that current and builds a magnetic field.
Right. But when the capacitor is empty, that magnetic field collapses, and that pushes current back the other way, recharging the capacitor.
Wow. This is a literal tug of war.
Yeah. And because no system is perfectly efficient, every time they throw that energy back and forth, the resistance in the circuit burns off a little bit of it as heat.
Okay, so to actually predict how this game of catch plays out, the chapter emphasizes that we need to know exactly how it starts.
Oh, the initial values, yes.
Right. Finding the initial and final conditions, finding V, I, and their derivatives. The text points out this is basically the major hurdle for students.
It is. If you mess up the starting line, the rest of your calculations are just, highly detailed fiction.
Because when you throw a switch, when you change the circuit, you introduce a shockwave.
Exactly. But we have two ironclad continuity rules to anchor us. First, the voltage across a capacitor cannot change abruptly.
Okay, so V at t equals 0 minus is exactly equal to V at t equals 0 plus.
Precisely. And second, the current through an inductor cannot change abruptly.
So I at 0 minus equals I at 0 plus.
Right. Think of them like heavy mechanical flywheels. Changing a capacitor's voltage instantly would require infinite current.
Which you can't have in the real world.
Right. And changing an inductor's current instantly would require infinite voltage.
Okay, let me unpack this and push back a little because this trips up so many people.
Go for it.
The voltage and the current don't jump. But what about their derivatives? Like, can the rate of change just snap instantly when the switch flips?
It absolutely can, yes.
Yeah.
That is exactly the shock wave I mentioned.
Really?
Yeah, the rate of change of voltage or current can sit at 0 for hours and then leap to a massive number the exact millisecond a switch is thrown.
Oh, wow. Okay, so if the derivatives are jumping around wildly, how do we actually calculate them?
You have to literally redraw the circuit specifically for the moment t equals 0 plus.
Ah, okay.
You replace the capacitors with voltage sources locked at whatever their continuous value was.
Yeah.
And replace inductors with current sources.
And then use KVL and KCL to solve for those derivatives.
Exactly. But you have to use the passive sign convention very carefully here.
Current entering the positive terminal.
Right. A single dropped negative sign at t equals 0 plus will cascade through your entire page of math.
Okay, duly noted. So we've carefully established our starting positions. Now let's watch those components play out in a closed system with no outside power.
The source-free series RLC circuit.
Right. A resistor, inductor, and capacitor all in a single closed loop. So we map this using Kirchhoff's voltage law.
Summing the voltages around the loop to 0. But since inductors and capacitors deal with rates of change, you get a second-order differential equation.
Right, which sounds terrifying.
It does. But to solve it, we just assume an exponential solution. And that simplifies everything down to something called the characteristic equation.
Which is basically just the quadratic formula, isn't it?
It essentially is.
Yeah.
And the roots of that equation dictate the circuit's entire behavior.
Okay, and the text introduces two key parameters here, alpha and omega zero. Let's break those down.
Sure. Alpha is the damping factor, measured in nepers per second. In a series circuit, it's equal to R over 2L.
So alpha is the friction, the resistor burning off energy.
Yes. And omega zero is the undamped natural frequency, equal to 1 over the square root of L times C.
That's the tug-of-war frequency. How fast L and C want to trade energy if there was no friction.
Exactly. And comparing alpha to omega zero gives us 3 possible cases.
Okay, I have an analogy for this. Let's compare damping to a heavy door with an automatic closer.
I like this. Okay, let's look at the first case, overdamped. This is when alpha is greater than omega zero.
So the friction wins.
Right. Real negative roots. The energy dissipates slowly without any oscillation.
So for the door analogy, the closer is cranked way too tight. You let go, and the door takes agonizingly long to close. It just oozes shut.
Perfect. Then there's critically damped. Alpha exactly equals omega zero, equal real roots.
The Goldilocks setting. The door shuts fast, perfectly smooth, and stops right at the latch without slamming back.
Yes. It's the fastest decay to zero without oscillation. And finally, the underdamped case.
Where alpha is less than omega zero.
Right. Complex roots.
So the door closer is totally busted. The door slams shut, flies open the other way, and swings back and forth violently before stopping.
Exactly. The energy is oscillating or ringing, transferring back and forth between L and C while slowly decaying.
Okay, so that's a series circuit, a single loop. But what happens to the math when we stack these components parallel to each other?
Well, now we apply Kirchhoff's current law at the top node, and the resulting equation looks almost identical.
Wait, here's where it gets really interesting to me. Omega zero stays exactly the same 1 over root LC, but alpha changed. It's now 1 over 2 RC.
Good catch.
Why did the math stay the same, but the variables flipped?
Because of duality. The chapter jumps into this a bit later in section 8.0, but it perfectly explains this.
Duality.
Yeah, in planar circuits, parallel is the dual of series. Voltage is the dual of current. Capacitance is the dual of inductance.
So the math is identical, just the roles are swapped.
Exactly. Which is why in a parallel circuit, we solve for the capacitor voltage first.
Oh, because voltage is continuous and shared across parallel branches.
Right. Whereas in the series circuit, we solve for inductor current first, because current is continuous in a series loop.
That is so elegant. Okay, so we've watched the energy drain away to 0. Now let's flip a switch and hit the circuit with a constant DC source.
The step response.
Let's see how it reacts.
So when you add a constant source, the total response to the circuit is now the sum of 2 parts. The transient response, which is the temporary dying out part we just learned.
Right, the ringing.
Plus the steady state response, which is the final resting value.
Okay, let me push back again. Does adding a DC battery completely mess up the characteristic equation? Like, does it change our alpha and omega zero values?
Surprisingly, no. The roots, alpha and omega zero, remain exactly the same.
Really? Why?
Because the physical circuit components, the R, L, and C, haven't changed. The only difference is that the differential equation now equals a constant instead of zero.
Oh, okay. So how do we find that final steady-state value then?
You simply look at the circuit as t approaches infinity.
A long time after the switch flips.
Right. You just replace the inductors with short circuits and the capacitors with open circuits and solve.
Just normal basic circuit math at that point.
Exactly.
Okay, but not every circuit is a neat textbook series or parallel loop. How do we systematically handle messy, real-world circuits?
The chapter lays out a bulletproof four-step method for any general second-order circuit. Section 8.7.
Okay, walk me through it. Step 1.
Step 1, find the initial conditions and the final steady-state value. Find out where you start and where you finish.
Makes sense. Step 2.
Turn off the independent sources.
Right.
This lets you find the form of the transient response using KVL or KCL to get the characteristic equation.
Okay, so you see if it's overdamped, underdamped, whatever.
Right. Then step 3 is to obtain the steady-state response.
Which we basically did in step 1.
Yep. And finally, step 4. Add the transient and steady-state parts together and use your initial conditions to solve for the unknown constants.
That's a great systematic approach. Now, looking at these general circuits, the chapter also brings up op-amp circuits. But I noticed they usually only use resistors and capacitors, just RC circuits. They ditch the inductors entirely. Why is that? I thought we needed LNC to make it second order.
Mathematically, yes, but physical inductors are heavy, bulky, and really hard to miniaturize on microchips.
Right, you can't put a giant coil of wire inside a smartphone.
Exactly. So engineers use op-amps. Op-amp RC circuits can mathematically mimic second-order behavior.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they act like filters or oscillators without the physical weight of coils. It's crucial for modern electronics.
That is so clever. So we have all these analytical tools, but how do engineers actually use this in practice?
Well, the text mentions computer software like PSpice. It plots these transient waveforms effortlessly.
But if the computer does it, why do we need to do the hand calculations?
Because you absolutely need to verify that the machine isn't outputting nonsense. If you don't understand the math, you won't know if you set up the simulation wrong.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Exactly.
Okay, let's talk real-world applications. The text mentions smoothing circuits.
Right. Digital to analog converters output these blocky staircase signals.
Very harsh digital steps.
Yeah. But a second-order RLC smoothing circuit acts as a filter. It turns those harsh steps into a smooth, readable analog wave.
It's like a shock absorber for the signal.
That's a good way to put it.
But I have to bring up example 8.1 scene, the automobile ignition system. This is what we talked about at the very beginning of the deep dive, and it is so cool.
It really is.
Walk us through how a 12-volt battery makes a 10,000-volt spark.
So you have a basic 12-volt car battery connected to an RLC circuit. The inductor is the ignition coil.
And the switch is closed, so steady current is flowing, building a magnetic field in the coil.
Right. But then the ignition switch, the breaker point, suddenly opens.
And we know inductor current cannot change abruptly.
Exactly. So it creates this massive underdamped response, a sudden ringing.
Because the magnetic field collapses violently.
Yes. And the math from the chapter shows that interrupting that tiny 12-volt source causes a sudden peak of 259 volts across the inductor.
259 volts from a 12-volt battery.
Mm-hmm.
Just from the inertia of the field collapsing.
Yep. And then a transformer steps that 259 volts up to 10,000 volts to actually fire the spark plug.
That is wild. The whole engine relies on an underdamped transient response.
It does.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground today. Let's do a quick recap. We started with tracking continuity jumps in voltage and current are crucial initial values.
Setting up KVL and KCL to find the roots.
Right. Understanding the tug of war between the inductor and the capacitor. We looked at determining damping factors are overdamped oozing doors and underdamped slamming doors.
We looked at duality in parallel circuits.
Yep, and then applying all of it to spark a car engine. But before we go, I want to leave you with one final, slightly provocative thought.
Okay, let's hear it.
Think about that ringing, underdamped response. We know that resistance, the R in the circuit, is the friction. It's what causes the energy to decay and the ringing to stop.
Right, the damping.
So, what would happen if you could build a circuit with absolutely zero resistance, or even mathematically speaking, negative resistance?
Oh, wow.
Could you create an oscillation that never dies? Or one that just grows forever?
Well, that is a very dangerous and very exciting question, and it's exactly what leads into the design of oscillators.
We will leave that open for you to ponder as you prepare for your future chapters. Thank you so much for joining us. Best of luck on your exams, and a warm thank you from the Last Minute Lecture team.